My 39 female ex-husband, 43 male, cheated on me with my brother, 44 male, and now he seems to be in a serious depression. I was married to my ex-husband for 9 years. We got divorced 5 years ago. I was about 4 months pregnant and went to the doctor. When I returned home, I found my older brother and my husband together. It was really disgusting for me to see. According to my ex-husband, he and my brother took drugs and he doesn't remember how they got into that situation. My brother is gay, but I never knew if my ex was gay or bisexual or anything like that. I filed for divorce and we share custody of our daughter. We have been cordial despite everything. We spend 2 holidays a year together, the 3 of us. Since the divorce, my ex-husband has been quite depressed. At first, he looked for any excuse to talk to me and be with me, but then he realized that it was not going to work. In these years that we have been divorced, he seemed quite depressed, tired, and talks less. He also gained too much weight. He didn't go to the gym, but he was a pound or 2 over his ideal weight, so he was at a pretty decent weight prior to this. Now, he weighs around 280 pounds, and I'm really worried about him. I also discovered that he recently lost his job, and he is staying with his sister, and that he is 1 step away from being diagnosed with diabetes. I don't know how to tell him that I'm worried about his health, since the last time I did it, he misunderstood, thinking I would give him another chance, which is not the case. How can I help him without misunderstanding the situation again? There are other comments from OP that says, he was unfaithful to me during the 9 years of marriage. That's why I assumed that what happened to my brother was infidelity. Someone responds to that and goes, could you explain better how he was unfaithful for 9 years? 2 of them, which I think OP is implying affairs, were emotional and sexual. The 3rd affair was only sexual. When I found out, he just apologized. I went to my mother's house, but most people said that it was an exaggeration to get divorced because of cheating, and that I was not going to find anyone who would always be faithful. Ooh. And then I would just go back to him. Well, the relationship between my husband and brother was normal before. When I found them, they appeared scared.
Am I the arsehole for telling my parents I won't pay to help my sister have a better life? Story time. So I was an only child for 14 years. And in all the years of living with them, they never believed in having nice things or treating me for any reason. Don't get me wrong, they had the money. My mum would always buy herself nice things. She always had like the latest designer bags. My dad was a really big golfer, so all the money would go on themselves. Anything I wanted, I was told no. Christmas and birthdays were for like practical gifts. I'm talking like notebooks, school supplies, new school shoes. I will never forget there was this one time I was maybe like 8 years old. I was playing out with my friends and the ice cream van came round. Literally all of the kids and all my friends are getting ice creams. When I went to my parents to ask if I could get one, they were like, you're not having one because ice cream isn't an essential, which that's an argument in itself. Instead, they suggested me going inside and getting some water if I needed to cool down. One of the neighbours even offered to pay for me, but my parents shut that down as well. So eventually, when I moved out, things started to change. They ended up having another child. She was a lot younger than me. And for her 5th birthday, they threw her a massive party. Bearing in mind, I had never ever had a birthday party. And my little sister Amy had a birthday party for every single birthday. So several months ago, my parents realised that obviously my TikTok was doing quite well. And they asked if I would be willing to buy my siblings these massive gifts. And I was like, absolutely not, no. My parents were like, oh, you know, your dad didn't get his bonus this year, so we haven't been able to get them as much. And that's my problem, how? And these were easily like £200 to £300 gifts. And I was like, I don't really like getting people big gifts. And they were like, oh no, they're not going to be from you. They wanted me to buy my siblings presents with my money, give the presents to them, and then they would give the presents to my siblings. The dots ain't lining up here for me. So after that, we just outright refused. I got them lovely Christmas presents on my own back. And they didn't really ask for money up until the other day. They came to me and outright asked me for £500 so that they could take my siblings on a little trip. Bearing in mind, I'd never been invited on any of these trips. Again, I outright refused. And they blew up at me. They were calling me stingy, tight-fisted. And when I asked, like, what is the problem here? They said to me, well, we just can't understand why you wouldn't want to help us pay to give your siblings a better life. I said, well, there was no concern for me growing up and me wanting a better life. And if you want to do all of these lovely things for them, you can pay for it yourself. My parents then said I was being petty and I was punishing the wrong people. What do you think? Am I in the wrong here?
My mom wants me to marry my dead sister's husband. Someone please help me escape this madness. I am beyond appalled, disgusted, and just shocked. I've got no one I can tell this to, and I need to get it off my chest. 4 months ago, my sister, 27 female, passed away and left behind her children. Collectively, we have done our part as a family to help them regain normalcy the best we can. We have been by their side every step of the way in dealing with their absence and their grief. As of lately, I, 23 female, have started to remove myself away from anything which has to do with her husband. I'll call Q, 30 male, due to comments sometimes inappropriate, but usually on the lines of how I look exactly like my sister. I still make every effort to manage the kids to the best of my ability, and I still have them on my days regardless. The bombshell was dropped a few days ago, and my sister's clothes were strewn all over, with her wedding dress, while my mother, my other sister, Q, and his brother sat around. According to them, my deceased sister's kids require a mother and her husband requires a wife. And since I am an identical copy to her, I am the one to fulfill these roles. Like, what the actual I'm fully aware grief can cause individuals to say weird things and act oddly at times, but this is something entirely different. The most dreadful aspect for me was the fact that they had already taken away her photos and had begun preparing for the wedding. I am lucky as Q's mother and father have not only selflessly taken myself in, but also the grandbabies. She's adamantly against this nonsense and feels we are all not safe around them, which I strongly agree with. I am fortunate to have an opportunity to work elsewhere, but I can't imagine leaving my nephews behind in this mess. I am still in a state of shock, trying to process the situation and how I can manage everything in this too. I'm just struggling to understand what could have brought this on or what could possess someone to behave like this, as I just can't wrap my head around it, and I'm sorry to vent, but thank you in advance.
Am I the astronaut for telling my sister that she shouldn't overvalue herself and prepare for the worst? Originally posted April 6th, 2024. I, 21 female, have an older sister, Eve, 29 female, who had her first child, Lori, 1 female. And while this should be a time of joy and excitement, there's actually a lot of tension and brewing resentment between her, our mom, and her husband, Jack, 29 male. Despite it being unplanned, Eve's pregnancy was wanted and Jack was an involved partner. He went to most of Eve's appointments, took the birthing classes, and supported Eve's decision to just have our mom in the room while he waited outside when she gave birth. The plan was for our mom to be by Eve's side in the room and to help save for a week after Lori was born. Everyone was cool with this, but unfortunately our aunt got into some drama with her husband in another state and mom rushed over to be at her sister's side. Eve was already in her 3rd trimester, so Jack didn't like the idea of our mom going and voiced it. Our mom tore Jack a new one and Eve even got on his case about it, so he apologized. However, Eve ended up going into labor and Jack ultimately was the one in the room while our mom was away. When she called, our mom expressed being sad over not being there for the birth of her first grandchild, and she and Eve decided that no one else in the family would see Lori until she got back, without discussing it with Jack. He was understandably not happy, as his mom lived about 45 minutes away and was looking forward to meeting Lori too, as she was the first grandchild on both sides. Eve pulled the "I just gave birth" card, and Jack reluctantly allowed it. On the day that our mom was supposed to come back, she missed her flight and couldn't get a new one until the following morning. Our mom could have just rented a car, but she didn't want to spend the money since the airline wouldn't refund the money. Jack brought up allowing his mom to come again, but Eve refused, citing that he had already agreed. Unfortunately, Jack's mom was in a car accident and passed before ever getting to meet Lori, since Eve wouldn't even allow a video chat. What the f*** is happening? Jack was distraught. He moved to the guest bedroom, went to the funeral alone, and refuses to engage with Eve at all. Jack's side of the family keeps calling and messaging Eve to tell her what a selfish and awful person she is, and Jack refuses to defend. Eventually, Eve got sick of it and packed up and left to her mom's house to teach Jack a lesson, but he hasn't texted or called. Our mom thinks that he just needs some space and that he'll call soon, but I just laughed at that. Didn't mean to, though. My mom and Eve asked me why I laughed, and I tried to brush it off or even leave, but they wouldn't let me and pressed for an answer. Eventually, I told her that while the accident wasn't her fault, she did keep Lori away from Jack's mom meeting her for a week, and now she never will. There's no way Jack is ever going to love you enough to forgive that, and that you should prepare for the worst. Eve started to bawl her eyes out while mom berated me, so I left. Am I the astronaut? We were wrong. Edit, just to clarify, because I keep seeing this when the accident first happened, Eve has apologized 3 separate times. Jack has admitted to this, and Eve intended to go to the funeral with him, but he drove off without her. Jack does interact with Lori. It's Eve that he's icing out, and my niece is the only thing he's willing to talk to Eve about. Jack had been living in the guest room for 5 months before Eve left. She's offered to go to couples counseling, but Jack has refused. Here is the update. Posted June 2nd, 2024, almost 2 months later. Hey, it's been a couple of weeks, and due to people still occasionally asking, I thought I'd give some quick updates to the situation. Here are the basic bullet points. My sister has now been officially diagnosed with postpartum depression, and that is the trump card or Hail Mary of the situation. My sister and her husband are living together again and in couples therapy. My sister is in individual counseling. My niece has now been officially introduced to a few members of her paternal side, and they all love her. Jack's family have ceased their negative comments about my sister, but she says that they're still pretty formal and distant towards her. I honestly don't know if she'll ever be in their good graces again, and will only put up with her for my brother-in-law and niece's sake. My niece's name, first and middle, is going to be legally changed to whatever Jack wants. For the next 5 years, brother-in-law's side of the family is getting priority when it comes to any and all holidays. My mom will be on a strict info diet when it comes to the baby. No pictures unless Jack approves. This is all I know for right now, and my mom is not happy with any of this and is calling Jack a controlling asshole. But my sister is holding firm in an effort to save her marriage. She claims that brother-in-law and she are making progress in counseling, and I hope for her sake that it's true. It's gonna suck not being able to see my niece as much as I wanted for the next possible few years, but compared to never being able to see her at all, like Jack's mom, it is what it is. I know a lot of you may not be happy with this update, but it is what it is for now. Relevant comments, original OP's thoughts. I won't deny that Jack is taking full advantage of Eve's willingness to do whatever it takes to save the marriage, but Jack has never come off as a controlling person in the past. I mean, he didn't put up any opposition to Eve's requests or demands since finding out that she was pregnant. But Eve has a support system if she feels like it's getting to be too much. I'm not going to get involved until I suspect violence. To a different commenter, I won't deny that Jack is taking advantage of the situation. He's hurt and angry and very resentful. He laid out his terms and Eve is agreeing to them. Plus, they're in counseling. It's not ideal, but it is what it is. Another commenter here, it doesn't read to me that OP is being restricted. OP is free to visit their niece. Jack's family just gets priority for holidays, and it seems like OP's family assumed that they would get majority of them, hence won't see kid as often as I'd like to. Original OP's response, yes, it's just the holidays for our side of the family. Right now I could drive up to see my niece so long as I call first. Commenter, what's the issue with the baby's name? Was Jack railroaded over that as well? Hey, we get to find out. Original OP, from my understanding, Eve got pick of the first name, and Jack got to pick the middle name from a list of names that Eve had, and my niece took Jack's surname. To a different commenter, to appease Jack, he didn't really get much of a say over naming the baby. My sister really played the whole "I'm the one carrying the baby" card. Commenter, I don't get why your contact with your niece has to be limited. I'm not sure the marriage will last anyway with these conditions. OP, right now it seems like Eve is just doing whatever it takes, whatever she has to do to keep Jack from leaving her, as well as getting back on Jack's family's good side.
My former students are graduating high school today, so get ready with me to attend their graduation. If you don't know, I was a teacher for 2 years before I went to law school. That was an era of time where I was only on Instagram, so you had to have been following me way back when to know about that time period in my life. The goal was always to attend law school, but it had become increasingly more apparent that it wasn't going to be the end of the world if I took time off and took a couple of years to gain work experience or get a fellowship or take gap years, whatever I wanted to do. And the main reason that I ended up teaching was simple. I didn't get any other job offer, at least not until very late in the game. I was bent on moving out of New York for the 2 years before I would go to law school. My rationale for that was, okay, I know I want to be in New York long term. This is a perfect opportunity to experience another city, to live on my own, to just do something other than be in New York, which is where I'm from. Because I wanted to go to law school in particular, I was looking for jobs at law firms. Honestly, there aren't too many entry-level, straight out of college jobs at law firms, except for project analysts or legal assistants. So that's what I was looking for. Highly, highly, highly competitive. It's not like I had any real ties to the cities that I was applying to. I think Chicago and DC were my big cities that I wanted to move to. I had actually never been to Chicago by that point. I was getting rejected left and right or a recruiter from the charter school that I worked at, which Success Academy was where I worked, which if you know, you know, came and was like, have you ever thought about work? And I was just like, you know what, at this stage, like, let's see what it's giving, because I should add, I had worked with kids before. I often like tutored, often volunteered with children. I worked at Prep for Prep, which I'm also a part of. And what's going on? I applied and I did well and I got the job offer. It wasn't until after I accepted that one of the law firms that I had applied to reached back out to me and was like, actually, we do have an opening. Did like a condensed second round interview and then got the job offer and had to decide between working at the law firm as a project analyst or legal assistant, I forget what the title was, or working as a teacher. Decided to become a teacher, mainly because by that point I had realized, like, if I know I'm going to law school, I have my whole life to work at a law firm. LOL. That's funny now. Never gonna be a teacher again. Those gap years before law school are like the last, not really the last, but like a major opportunity to do something that you don't think you're going to do ever again in your life. I was feeling pretty down about the fact that like I was the only one of my friends going into public service. Like I was going to be back in New York even though I didn't want to. I wasn't working at a big consulting firm or bank. Like those things sort of got to me, but I cannot emphasize enough how that was the best decision for me to become a teacher. I really didn't want to work a desk job. I am not a desk job type of person at all. The types of things that I want to do are stand on my feet and talk and move around and travel. And, you know, and obviously there are always going to be administrative functions, but in my heart of hearts, I have never, ever, ever wanted to be in an office working a desk job. But back to my experience as a teacher, I loved it. I didn't love the school that I worked at. In fact, most, if not the heart of my personal statement was about how the school that I worked at inspired me to want to, re-inspired me to want to go into law and to go into education policy and to defend the rights of children. Essentially, I was on some, I want to go to law school so I can sue this school. Suspensions were crazy. Suspensions are a big deal to me. Not the natural progression. Because you missed detention, now you get suspended. Like, that's kind of crazy to me. So one of the most memorable experiences that I had going back to the whole, like, suspending kids for missing detention was when I had to defend a student, put my foot down and be like, no, this kid is not getting suspended. One of my students at the time apparently had gotten detention, and the detention fell under the language of extreme disrespect, which was like very, very objective, which like, again, problem number one. Like there was like a demerit system where like you could get deductions or bonuses, but then if you did something, right, it would be extreme disrespect. So another teacher at some point during the day gave this student extreme disrespect. By the time this student came into my classroom, I didn't really know, and I was one of the few teachers at the time who was running her classroom by herself. They had a co-teacher model where one teacher would teach the math and one teacher would teach the science. One teacher would teach the English and another teacher would teach the history. And although I was hired as a history teacher, by the second year, like, because there was always a struggle to hire teachers and because some of the new teachers they hired weren't really up to par enough to teach their own classes, they just offered me the option to teach both history and English on my own in a class. Doable, yes. But like, was it a challenge? There were a lot of systems that other classrooms might have had that like sometimes might have fallen through the cracks in my classroom because I was just like, yo, we gotta pack up, we gotta do dismissal, let's get up out of here. So at any rate, on this particular day, my system in the classroom was to check the email that went out saying who had detention and then write the students' names on the board who had detention, so that it would be crystal clear and so that they knew like when dismissal happens, you're actually going to detention, you're not going to dismissal. On this particular day, I forgot to check, and so I forgot to put the names on the board for kids who had detention. dismissed all the students, and then get a slack from one of my co-teachers who was running detention, who was like, oh, so-and-so isn't here. He skipped detention. He should get suspended. Because our rule at the time was if you skip detention, you get suspended. And so I quickly was like, oh snap, like that's my bad. I completely forgot to inform my class or to even check who had detention to inform them of their detention. And this teacher was not having it. They were like, yeah, no, but this person knew they had detention. They knew when they got it during the lunch period, so it doesn't matter. And that really annoyed me. Like that really, like, I responded being like, okay, cool. I don't think it's necessary to suspend them. And this is happening in like the grade team Slack. Person was very adamant. And I was just like, we have a system in my classroom. We have a system in my classroom. I'm telling you that the system was not adhered to today. No, literally no. And I'm not gonna lie to you, like this wasn't even a student that was like one of my favorites. Like me and the student, like low key, there was some work. There was some work that went into showing this student the love that they deserve. But I genuinely, I'm just like, regardless of whether or not this student tries, regardless of whether or not this student, like the issues that I have with this student, I genuinely do not believe it is fair to give this person a suspension when this could easily be rectified by informing them tomorrow, telling them tomorrow, and having them serve detention tomorrow. You may not know this, but when you apply to be a licensed lawyer, so after you take the bar, after you take all and pass it, after you do all of those things and you actually apply to go through character and fitness and all that stuff, they ask you about suspensions. Like they will ask you about that suspension. So a lot of these schools, especially some of these charter schools, are probably thinking like, oh, this is internal, like, you know, no one's gonna see it, da 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 da. But it's like, nah, some of these kids who you're suspending left and right are gonna turn it around and go to law school, become lawyers, and then just have to like explain why they got suspended so many times in middle school, because that's not a normal thing everywhere else to be suspended at the rate that some of these kids were. I'm getting on my soapbox, but clearly the passion is still there. I actually recently found out that one of my former students is going to Harvard, which is very exciting. And I'm just like very happy for them, very excited for them. And I'm not tooting my own horn at all, but to the extent that like, you know, when they were in 7th grade and they saw this like young black woman teacher who had gone to Harvard, like to the extent that that did something for them, to the extent that it made them feel like, oh, like people who go to Harvard don't have two heads, right? Like people, like it's actually possible. I'm seeing someone right here in front of me who did that, who accomplished it. And so to the extent that like my mere presence as a teacher, like inspired something or made something seem real or made something seem within reach, like that is quite literally why I became a teacher.
Just want to hop on here to say that if the guy you're dating in any way resembles Harry Jowsey on this season of The Perfect Match, that man deserves prison time for the shit he's pulling on this show. The other night I was up all night. I was like this. He is such a textbook narcissistic douchebag loser that's like, oh, I've gone to therapy, reconciled with the things that I've done. But if you bring up that I was a douchebag in the past, I'll lose it on you and start bawling and say you're not allowed to say mean things to me. You do things he did in this show that just, I was like, wow, I can't believe people are attracted to this. First is when he broke up with his first match, Elise, blackout drunk. He walks in, he's like, hey, I talk to you. Oh, yeah. It's like a fucking mess. And she's like, are you gonna go with the other girl? He's like, yeah, I mean, I came here to do, but like, listen, like, you're a really amazing person. He's sitting there like, I was falling in love with you. And he's like, yeah, okay, are we done? And he gets up and he walks away. He leaves Elise for Jessica. But then when Jessica says to him, hey, everybody says that you're a fuckboy, he goes, you can't say that to me. You can't talk to me like that. You're being mean to me. He's like, I'm just voicing a concern because everybody's saying it. Even your good friend Dom, who's also a loser, is crying. He starts crying. And then he goes back to his room and cries and says, I'm gonna go home. Till that girl then goes, I feel so bad for making him cry. So you've gaslit this chick who has a very valid concern that you're a motherfucker, because you are, into feeling bad for raising any sort of concern, wouldn't listen to any criticism from the other girl who was like, it's kind of shitty, you're leaving me for this new chick. And then you go into interviews and you sit down and you go, everybody's just saying such mean things about me and I don't know why, and you start crying. My brother in Christ, that's the consequences of your action. Come on the show and say you're a reformed man when you're literally pulling the same shit you were pulling with Francesca. And guess what? You've always been a little baby-faced fucker, okay? Like, I feel bad. You feel bad for this man? He's making $100,000 for 1 second on OnlyFans. Like, I don't care. You didn't go to therapy. You didn't do shit. You're just a motherfucker that wants to get away with whatever you want to get away with. And that's what most men are on that show. And I'll also say, isn't it funny that no matter who it was, what the couple was, the man always went for the new girl? Because men love new shiny things. So don't come on here and be like, I went to therapy, blah, blah, blah. Babe, you can't hear one piece of constructive criticism about the trail of bodies you left behind you. Anyone brings up the fact that you were maybe a bit of an asshole, you start crying? Like, what a loser. And these girls stick around because they feel bad. Oh, he's trying to change. No, he's not. He's a fucking tool. I've never seen a bigger idiot on TV. I honestly haven't. It's keeping me up at night.
I was kidnapped by Hamas. Disclaimer, I do not support Netanyahu. I definitely do not support Hamas. I support humanity. I support people that are suffering, and I just want to tell their stories, whether they are Palestinian or Israeli. I will be doing both Gaza and Israeli story times, and anybody else. On October 7th, Mia Shem attended Nova Music Festival, a festival which ironically is known for celebrating unity and love. The festival ran into the early morning, and this is when, at 7 a.m., Hamas gunmen launched hundreds of rockets and broke through barricades. They forced their way into the border with Israel, and this is when they began gunning down festival attendees. Mia said, out of nowhere they began shooting at us, murdering people. Can you imagine being at a music festival with your bestie, and out of nowhere you were being attacked by gunmen? Mia, along with her friend Elisa, were able to run to their car and drove away. But this is when they started shooting at her tires, forcing her to sway and coming to a full stop. Mia was shot in her arm. The wound was so severe that it almost detached her arm from her body. That's when a gunman forced her into a car and she was taken into Gaza. And there she was kept in a dark room for 3 days, still having that bullet wound in her arm. After the 3 days, she was taken to another gunman's house. This is where she would be kept on watch 24/7. She said her biggest fear was to be R-worded. Her captor was in her room with her all the time, watching her all the time. They were keeping her at this man's house. This means his family was there and his vigilant wife, and that's the reason he did not assault her. In a series of events, she was taken to a hospital where her arm was operated on. The day after the surgery, her captors forced her to film a video where she claimed she was being taken care of. And in that video, you can see a doctor changing the dressing on her arm. But after that, she was told to do it herself. A week later, Mia sees her mother on the news pleading for her return. And luckily, this gave her the strength that she needed. She thought it would probably be best if she tried to humanize herself to her captor. She did this by simply speaking with him. And she also listened to him complaining about his own wife. Now, during the bombing in Gaza, she was moved around from house to house. At one point, she found herself in a house with 4 gunmen and their AK-47s. She was terrified, but she offered to cook them a meal. She believes that this further humanized her in their eyes. The last 5 days in captivity, she was kept in tunnels, and she was there with 6 or 7 other Israeli captives. On the 5th day, she was handed over to the IDF and taken back to Israel. When she finally returned home, doctors operated on her arm, and thankfully they were able to save it because Mia did something incredible. She kept moving and massaging her arm throughout her captivity, and this helped with the blood flow. And of course, she changed her own dressings. During her captivity, she did not shower, and I imagine she probably didn't want to get naked in front of her captor. She was also not given any medication, and she was in constant fear. She is now safe back home. I already posted one Gaza story time last week. This week is an Israeli one, and next week is another Gaza family story time. We'll also be doing a story time on Rafah. If you would like to help people and donate, I have many sources linked in my bio. Thank you for watching. Bye.